I started smoking when I was 16 years old. I smoked continuously and vigorously for 25 years, and then when I decided or tried to quit smoking, I ended up switching over to vaping for 10 more years. I've been completely off of all things nicotine, more or less, for well over a year now. And I was so addicted. I would constantly, like, you know, if you're a smoker, you constantly have to have your gear. I rolled my own cigarettes, so it was the pack of tobacco, the papers, and the lighter. If you're just smoking normal cigarettes, it's just the pack and the lighter. I remember just many times when I would just tap my pocket that I thought my lighter was in, and it wouldn't be there, and just the anxiety that would just rise, this mini flip, as I checked the other pocket and found out that it was over there. Or as I looked around me and saw that there were hundreds of people with lighters everywhere around me, open flames, people smoking. But just that little thing where before your brain can rationally work a problem out, it flips out because it's thinking that I don't have immediate, constant access to nicotine. And that the fact that that addiction can give you those mini anxiety jolts, that's just crazy.
That's crazy.
When I started smoking, it was not only socially acceptable, but it was ubiquitous. It was everywhere. And when I say socially acceptable, sure, there were a lot of people telling you not to smoke, but most of them were doing it with cigarettes in their hands while they were smoking. So the message was a little bit unclear. And also because it was everywhere, it was kind of a thing that adults did. So as stupid teens, this was a thing that almost everyone I knew was trying and getting into. Not everybody stuck with it as long as I did. They didn't all have the willpower to smoke for 25 years. But I remember during track practice, when we were doing long distance, cross country, we would sneak a couple of cigarettes into our little tiny track shorts, and halfway through like a 6-mile run, we'd stop and have a couple smokes. So it was a different time, and we were pretty stupid teenagers. Then, other than just being completely addicted and sinking into the habit and having it all around me and most of the people I know around me doing it, it also became definitely a social crutch. Having a cigarette in your hand was something to kind of keep you occupied and at least make you look like you were doing something and not just standing there doing absolutely nothing. Smoking was a really easy way to turn a large crowd into a smaller crowd. If you were in some big event indoors and there were a lot of people and you didn't really know where to put yourself, if you stepped out for a smoke break, you were going to immediately find yourself with a couple other people who were there for the same thing, and it was a very useful social crutch in that way. And then I moved to France. So I thought that smoking was ubiquitous in America in the 80s and 90s. When I got to France right around 2000, you could step off the plane in Charles de Gaulle Airport and light up a cigarette immediately. Now, it was not specifically allowed, but it was one of those things, I guess, for the French at that point, where you weren't supposed to do it, but if you really needed to, you know, go ahead and have a smoke. It reminds me of the unwritten rule in Texas, where murder is illegal unless the person needed killing.
Maybe he had it coming.
And then above and beyond the airport, we were smoking in the waiting room at the doctor's office. When I was a hiking guide in the French Alps, and I would take groups for these 7 to 10 day treks, as we were heading up the mountain, I would have to take a break from time to time when I would see that my group was getting a little bit tired. And I would, every single time, as soon as I called break and sat down, I'd light up a smoke. And the break lasted the length of my smoke. And then I would put it out, and we would get back to hiking up the mountain. And in France, nobody found that particularly crazy. Fast forward a handful of years, and they have finally banned smoking in bars and restaurants. Obviously, we always smoked in bars. You would never wear a sweater or any clothes because they would just reek of cigarette smoke. In restaurants, we would smoke between courses. They would bring out one course, you'd eat it. As soon as it was gone, you knew you had, 5 to 10 minutes. So you would immediately light up a smoke in the middle of the restaurant as other tables were actually eating their meal. And if the food came before you're finished, you just crush it out and attack the next course. And then a couple years after that, the aqua genius was going to become a dad, and he decided it was time to quit. So before the birth of my first child, literally he's in the oven, it's months away, I decided, got to quit smoking. So I was working on it, and it was almost certainly not going very well, because I remember that this was the exact same time that vaping was basically been invented. And I knew that because I saw them at the tobacco store. In France, you only buy cigarettes at a specific tobacco store. And if I was in the tobacco store when I was supposed to be quitting, I'm guessing that it wasn't going terribly well. And so at that point, instead of buying that pack of smokes that I wasn't supposed to buy because I was quitting, I grabbed the vaping pens at that point. It was the very first ones that actually looked like a little fake cigarette made out of metal. It was single use. The battery would just die or the liquid would run out or something. But it was nicotine and it wasn't smoking. And so basically, I was able to mostly quit smoking, and I picked up a vicious vaping habit. And so I went from the vaping pens to the module things where you can, these big puffs of smoke coming out. And it was almost more addicting because this was definitely the kind of cultural moment where smoking was going out. In America, it was way, way out. Even in France, it was less popular. But vaping, especially in France, you could do it anywhere, all the time. All of a sudden, I was vaping at my desk at work. And I was vaping in bars and restaurants. And it almost went back to the days of the Charles de Gaulle airport. Because in restaurants and bars, it wasn't really openly acceptable. People weren't blowing out huge puffs of smoke. But you could definitely, under your chin, under your beard, take a couple puffs where you needed one. And so, all of a sudden, as smoking was going out of vogue, vaping completely took over that place. And for me, instead of having 10 or 15 cigarettes a day, I was vaping from morning until I went to bed. And you could even vape in bed with absolutely no worries. It was insane. So the idea of vaping as a way to stop smoking, you'll see by the end of this video that there's some merit to that, but it does not make it a whole lot easier. What vaping actually really helped with was the fact that when I was vaping hardcore, I could go out to a party and smoke all night like a crazy person, and the next day not smoke. Where that never worked before. Anyone who's tried to smoke, they know that if you've got an event or an evening where you go back, all that addiction comes back in, and it is so incredibly hard to not just start smoking the next day like you'd never stopped. With the vaping, what was really impressive is that I could do that. I could smoke for a night, for a weekend, a week on vacation, and then just turn it off. Just put the smokes away, start vaping again, nicotine for nicotine. That actually worked, but it was a very, very long road to get rid of nicotine completely. And when I say get rid of nicotine completely, it's almost more the habit of vaping. It had become so ubiquitous and constant in my life that actually turned out to be the hardest thing to get rid of. Let me explain a little bit. If people haven't vaped before, you get the liquid that you put into the little machine that you're actually turning into vapor and inhaling. And that liquid has different amounts of nicotine in it. Over here, I believe it was 3, 6, 9, and 12 milligrams per whatever. And I started off probably at 12 and then quickly wanted to be somewhere in the middle range. So I was vaping like 6 milligrams for most of the time that I was vaping. And then when I really kind of got serious about this, need to bring this down, I brought it down to 3. And then at some point, I think I tried once and it didn't take. And then another point, I just started buying zero nicotine, the liquid. And with the idea that, especially after a couple of days or a week or so, where I was like, yeah, I can kind of do this. This isn't that bad. I figured that at some point relatively soon, it would just seem ridiculous to be vaping with no nicotine. And yet, months went by where I couldn't put the thing down. And the hardest part was not the nicotine. Like I said, it had been months. There was no more nicotine dependence physically in my body. It was the habit. It was the habit of doing this all day long, of doing it when I felt stressed or whatnot. And that was the one, more so than going from 3 to 0, where I just kind of one day was like, yeah, I'll just get the no nicotine liquid. The one that I had to be like, okay, you have to do this now, was actually just setting the thing down that had no nicotine in it, but that I had still been sucking on for months at this point. And that was the hardest one. What's interesting about it, though, is once I got through it, I didn't have the urges for the vaping. Not nearly as strong as smoking urges. And so like I said at the beginning, I've been off of the smoking, the vaping for more than a year. And it is not easy. There are definitely moments that suck. It's definitely like a roller coaster. There are waves to it. I remember periods where I was just like, why do I want to smoke all the time? This blows. And now I'm actually in a period where it's not really something I think about. Even getting prepared for this video and doing all of this, it's not something that's bothered me. That said, in the last year, I've had 4 cigarettes. I haven't vaped at all. Those 4 cigarettes were each at very opportune times. On vacation, the moment where I'm sitting in the sun with a cocktail or a beer in my hand, and I see somebody down the next table over. I only rolled my cigarettes, so I never bum an actual cigarette. And also they cost like $8 a pack now, so it's a big ask. Where somebody who's rolling their cigarettes, it's costs much less per cigarette, and there's a ton in that little bag, so you're not asking somebody for one of their last couple smokes. Anyway, so I see that person. And then also people who roll their cigarettes tend to be kind of hippies, and so they're usually pretty cool about letting you bum one. And so 4 times in the last year, that situation has arisen. Once on vacation, once I was in a bar up in Paris, just sitting there, just drinking, just day drinking and watching Paris go by. And a couple of girls sat down next to me, and I had to bum a cigarette. And I will tell you, each of those cigarettes was absolutely exquisite. I enjoyed every last little bit of it, and was very happy also that it didn't lead to another one. Like I said, it'd be months before the situation would arise. I highly doubt that I'm going to tell myself that this is something I can do. This is definitely something I shouldn't do. And even those bonus smokes need to stop. But I just wanted to kind of go through all of the different things that happen from the beginning to even now that I've quit, how I quit with the vaping and the actual cigarettes. Right now I can't really imagine it. I'm sure in a month or two I'll go through a wave again where I'll be like, I just want to start smoking again. Oh, and the best anecdote of all, I almost forgot it, is at one point when I was in one of these waves where I wanted to smoke every day, my brain was not working chronologically, and so I actually had the random thought, like, why can't I just start smoking again? Like, why would that be so bad? And then it took a second, like a beat, be like, oh, yeah, the early terrible death and not seeing your children grow up thing. But, so yeah, your mind will play tricks on you. It's a whole thing. If you've enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you would go ahead and hit that like button. If you'd like to watch another video, there'll be one up here. You can also subscribe by hitting this button here. If you'd like to and you're able to do it, I'll put a link down in the description for my Patreon if you would like to support this channel further. Now, please don't be alarmed. This is the prop cigarette that I made for the thumbnail.